Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being so patient. I've just had a quick read through the chat box, so thank you for that. That gives me a bit of an idea where you're all from. Just so you know where I am, I'm from a place called the Intact Centre, which is a community centre in Preston, which is in Lancashire, and we're in a little place called Ingle. And we've been a community centre here for about 23 years, I think it is, altogether. And I've been at the centre for 9 of those years. I'm looking forward to sharing this session with you today. So I know we've only got half an hour, so I'll whiz through for you just to give you a bit of a taster. So this was my little icebreaker. I wondered what you could see out of your window today, but I don't know about you, it's a bit of a grey, wet, windy, horrible day, and I've had to move, so I can't see out of a window at all. I can just see a nice yellow wall. So if there's something there that you'd be quite happy to share with us, if you can see anything at all out of your window, it's always quite nice to know what you're all looking at out there as well. So if you get a chance, just while you are having a little practice in the little chat panel there, and by all means you can ask questions as you go along as well. Oh, Sarah, that looks amazing then, if you can see that. No windows for you. Oh, cover the building, city centre, so you can see the shops. Nice. So I can imagine where you all are. So as we go along, I'm going to crack on for you and just let you see what I'm going to cover for you today. So we're going to gain an overview really of what is needed to bring volunteers into the project, and just equip you all hopefully with some insights into really what do we need when we're looking at volunteer management. That's really what I wanted to do, and I wanted us to really think about some of the things that we need to with volunteer management. Now I can see that some of you are already working with volunteers. So forgive me if I'm kind of saying the same things to you, but hopefully you'll get something out of today as well. So you may have seen this definition by NCVO. Volunteering is someone spending time unpaid doing something that aims to benefit the environment or someone who they are not closely related to. So volunteering must be a choice freely made by each individual. I'm sure that's not a shock for any of you. I'm sure you've all heard that before. So it's a really nice, encompassing definition that's often been used now for quite some time. So I'm really interested in the volunteer management side of things. So management in the process is the process of working with and through others to achieve organisational objectives in a changing environment. So central to this is the effective and the efficient use of limited resources. So you can see that was a quote that I took because ever more so now there's more of an emphasis on us working with volunteers, because of course we're all in these times of kind of trying to make everything go a little bit further these days as well. So it's about looking and remembering what your organisational objective is, knowing what's happening in the climate out there within the government and all the different changes and the cutbacks and things, but still managing to be effective and efficient of the limited resources that we've got access to. I'm sure you'll all agree with that. So I've put something together today so we can look at what the 8 different functions of you volunteer management, managing a team of volunteers. I don't know whether that is your responsibility or whether you will be part of that or whether you're used to doing that, but I've kind of taken it really as a refresher as I've been going through. I think it's been a really useful refresher for myself. But also, if you're starting up, it's a really good kind of a nice step-by-step instruction on how you may wish to start to think about bringing volunteers into your organisation. So I'm going to take each of these 8 areas and kind of dissect them a little bit and talk about them a bit more. So we're going to take the first one first of all, planning. They always say that if you actually plan to take, or whatever you're planning really, it's going to be more successful. So you must take time as an organisation planning for your volunteers. And then you want to identify the actual services that volunteers are going to be involved in. You're going to have to think about how you're going to effectively engage with these potential volunteers, what your plan is to go out and recruit. Identify the skills that your volunteers are going to need, and also you as the volunteer manager, coordinator, that you're also going to require in order to get these volunteers. And then obviously you've got to think about sustaining the volunteering project. So some of these things have been really interesting and important from my journey as well as a volunteer manager. Again, it's kind of identifying, and over the years we've needed different volunteers, we've needed different categories of volunteers, we've needed different skills from the volunteers as well. So we've got a really nice range here at our centre of quite high skilled roles, and some skills that are kind of a bit easier for people to do as well, which really matches the community that we live in. So hopefully we can offer most people a varying degree of different roles. So thinking about decision making, it's really important that we think about, again, which programme do volunteers serve. Now we have various grants coming into the centre. I'm going to give you a little bit of a description about what we've got going on in our centre, so you've got an idea of what sort of things we do here. So as you come in off the street, you're automatically met by our reception area. So that's one of our first areas that people will volunteer in, our reception area. So that's an area that we want to recruit in. We've also got a work club on today, so we've got volunteers that help out in our work club. In between our work club, our IT suite, we've got people teaching computers. Of course, we're a UK online centre and have been for quite a number of years. We've got a cafe as well, so we've got volunteers that get involved in cafes. As I speak at the moment as well, we've got a talk from a member of the local community talking about Morris dancing. So we've got somebody there who's like a hostess, so they're meeting, greeting, taking registers, making brews, setting up the room, setting down the room, things like that as well. We also have on site today, we've got like a smoking cessation, so sometimes again we have volunteers who are involved in that. So again, we kind of have these discussions as a team to see where our volunteers, where we need volunteers, and where volunteers could sit quite nicely within the organisation. So that's made by all of us as a team, and we often consult with each other because we don't want loads of volunteers for things that we don't actually need them for, because otherwise your volunteers aren't going to stay. Who will the volunteers support? So are they going to be working with volunteers on a regular basis in terms of, are they going to be supporting teams of people? Are they going to have customer contact? Are they going to be working with other volunteers? Are they going to be working with staff? Are they going to be working on their own? So again, you need to really think and scope that as well. Thinking about how you're going to reach new volunteers, you need to think about having a marketing plan in place and looking at how you're going to take those volunteers on. And again, we're going to touch on some of these things in future webinars as well. How you're going to create an effective recruitment process. Which volunteers are you going to accept? Because not every volunteer who actually says they want to be a volunteer is going to be the right one for your organisation or for your project, and it's how you manage that. So we'll be looking at that as well. Who and how will you actually support the volunteers? Sometimes it's quite a naive assumption that just by bringing volunteers into the centre, into your project, that's going to instantly add an extra resource into your project, because as we all know, it's it's not. You know, that volunteer is going to need nurturing. They're going to need, there's a lot of administration behind that. There's going to be a lot of support in terms of your induction, getting your DBS sorted out, putting in volunteer training programs, and all the things that go with having volunteers as well. So you need to identify who's going to support the volunteers. Fine if there's only a handful of volunteers for yourself to support, but we have, I think I counted up yesterday, we've got 45 active volunteers, and I know I can't possibly go around and meet all of those volunteers because I have other roles as well as being a volunteer lead here. You also want to think about what you're going to include and what you're going to amend as regards to your existing policies and procedures in place as well. So if you just bring in volunteers into the centre, you might need to update those as well and make sure that they're included. We're moving on now to organising. So again, you want to think about some of your structural considerations. So your chain of command. So again, just to kind of give you an overview of the way that we work here at the centre, I am the volunteer lead, but again, as I mentioned, we've got 45 volunteers that are currently active with us at the moment. Yesterday I counted that we had 396 volunteers that's actually been on our systems over kind of the last 5 years. So that's an awful lot of volunteers that we've been working with and supported. So we need a very clear chain of command. I think you need a paid member of staff who's going to be involved in that as well, really, to kind of make sure that everything's running well. But you might also choose to have some volunteers who are there to do supervision and to do some training with you, or maybe even to do some of your volunteer admin. So again, thinking about a division of labour amongst the teams, I mentioned before to you the range of different volunteering opportunities that we've got. Each of those projects that we run, there is a paid staff lead, and that paid staff lead is the person that the volunteer will initially go to. And again, I'll talk about that much more in some of the other webinars that I'll be delivering in terms of getting a real thorough induction and making the placements work. So how much time will the paid staff dedicate to supporting the volunteers? As I mentioned, they've probably got other responsibilities. I know we're getting a lot of work in at the moment around employability and doing some quite nice employability projects. So we've got a new team of, we were looking last week at talking about getting a group of mentors in to take on some of their responsibilities. So when we actually started to talk about that and break it down in terms of what skills they're going to need, what training they're going to need, you know, there's a lot of organising and a lot of consideration that we're going to have to put into that as well. So talking about staffing, really, we're thinking about who's going to do the marketing, because without marketing you can decide that you're going to have a team of volunteers, but if nobody actually goes out there and actually actively looks at marketing, then that's something that you need to think about. And your marketing can be all sorts. It can be that you want to think about putting posters about, it might be social media, it might be that you want to go out and talk to groups. So again, you'll need a person to get involved with the marketing side of things. Recruiting is also quite a lengthy process, and you might need systems putting in place there to make sure that you've got your recruitment systems in place properly. And with that, you're going to have to think about your application forms, maybe welcome booklets, maybe handing out forms to tell people about what opportunities you've got, and you're going to have to maybe set up your interviewing processes as well, and having paperwork around, you know, if you're going to accept people, who's going to write off for the references, who's going to send off and do DBS, you know, so there's a lot of staff that might be involved already. In terms of induction, again, you might want to think about what project people are on, depending on how long that induction is going to be. So for example, before I mentioned that we have a reception area, and then I talked about some of the other things that we've got going on at the centre. Now our receptionist needs to know everything that's going on at the centre. So that induction is going to be a phased induction, and it happens over a longer period of time for them. So to give them all the information in one kind of half an hour meeting is unrealistic. That person's going to need a lot of investment to let them know how to work the telephone systems, to know everybody's role here at the centre, to know how to read our Outlook, to know how to contact people. And we also do drop-ins as well, so we get people coming in with all sorts of questions, and it can be from a lost dog to somebody who's been sanctioned on the benefit. So again, the person on the reception is going to have a really long induction and will need ongoing training and support. So that's where I come to the next element, which is training. So again, you might want to think about what you're going to include in your training. You might think about having an annual training plan, and in that annual training plan it might be that you want your volunteers to have health and safety, it's maybe that you want safeguarding in there, it's maybe that you want customer service. Some of the things that we're putting together at the moment are essential training and desirable training, and I'm actually going to be recruiting some of my volunteers to help me put together a training package. Now if you've got money and you can bring external people in, then that's brilliant, and you might need to do that for things like if your group of volunteers need health and safety, if they need food hygiene, again if they're going into catering or anything like that as well. So you might want to think about some of the training that you can offer either in-house, internally or external. In terms of support, that's where you're thinking about your supervision and what kind of model of supervision you're looking at. For me, that's also a really important thing. There are different models. Are you going to be meeting your volunteers on a one-to-one basis? How frequent are you going to be doing it? Are you going to be keeping notes? Where are you going to keep those notes? Are you going to have peer group supervision? What space have you got for your volunteers? Are they all coming from other sites? So they're going to come to your centre? Are you going to go to their centre? So again, it's all sorts of considerations there that you might want to think about. I mentioned before as well about policies and procedures, making sure that you've got a volunteer policy in that's active, and again making sure that your volunteers are included in all sorts of things, maybe around your expenses policy. If you've got an expenses policy, do they know about your health and safety policies? Do they know about gift policies? All those sorts of things as well that might not sound really exciting, but they need to be included also. So again, in terms of administration, how are you going to keep files? Are you going to keep electronic files for your volunteers? Are you going to keep paper copies? How are you going to trace who's sent off references when they've got DBS forms coming back in, if somebody's attendance levels, training, so there's a whole kind of administration database that needs to be going on behind the scenes as well. So again, you can see that there's lots of layers of volunteer management that's necessary really as well for you to have a successful placement. So moving on now to communication. So one of the things that also we look at, we've managed to get investors in volunteers here at the centre, and I've kind of taken us through it twice, and one of the things that they're really keen on is this whole idea of consulting with volunteers. So feeding volunteers thoughts and wishes up to the management team, and also feeding back down. So anything that's going on regularly at the centre, is it nice that our volunteers read about our funding situation in maybe the local newspaper, or if it's if there's something that's going on and people are talking in the community about changes to our funding perhaps, or is it nicer that we actually invite our volunteers in and we make sure that they're they're informed, kind of formally. So it's about how we might do that. Do we have volunteers on our staff agenda? If you've got staff meetings, that's always important. Do you have things like a volunteer forum to give them opportunities for you to talk and get feedback and consult with them? So again, they're all kind of listed in these various areas as well. Again, if you're doing peer group supervisions, that tends to be the model that we use here at the centre, because we tend to have, I know if you think about our IT volunteers, we have, at times we've got about 13 IT volunteers, so it makes sense, rather than repeating the same things over and over again, that we actually bring our volunteers together with a member of staff, and we'll ask what's going well, what's not going well, has anybody got any ideas, any suggestions over things if it's identified that something's not going particularly well, and to let our volunteers feel that they're actually being heard as well. We think that's a really important thing. We also run volunteer forums. Volunteer forums are where we invite all the volunteers into the centre, and we do that usually 3 times a year. And that also gives me an opportunity to run a training session as well. So I might make those part of my annual training plan. So the first section may be about what's current in terms of funding, where we need volunteers, how volunteers, volunteers can meet each other, they can share about what they've been involved in. It's also an opportunity for us to say thank you to our volunteers and give them some food as well, and just kind of have some fun with them as well, to make them see that they're part of something a little bit bigger. You can also pick up any areas for concern if you're just having, if you're having peer group supervisions or forums, and then you might even decide to have one-to-ones with some of the volunteers if they've got any particular issues as well. So it's about dealing with any problems arising from volunteers, and again, I will be picking that up and going a little bit more in depth with that over the series of webinars that I hope you'll be joining us with. Motivation is a really important one as well. So otherwise, if you're not involving and getting your volunteers motivated, you can often feel like you're on this kind of treadmill of recruiting volunteers and staying for a little bit and then dropping off, and you can spend all your time then and start to feel a little bit disheartened yourself. So motivation involves encouraging volunteers to collectively pursue common values and outcomes. So one of the things that we do here at the centre is sometimes we'll show people, if we're working from a grant, we'll show them what we've said our outcomes are. So we're all working towards that common goal. So for instance, if we were to meet 20 people to get them through maybe a programme each month, and our volunteers aren't aware of that, and we're kind of maybe in the background thinking, oh, they're spending an awful long time with them and they need to move them through, they won't understand that unless we give them that background information. So we find that that helps getting this kind of collective common value really of what we're looking for in terms of outcomes. So we'll let our volunteers know what those outcomes and targets are as well. It's really important to make sure that the roles that the volunteers are doing actually meet the volunteers' expectations, because if a volunteer wants to come into the centre and thinks that they're going to be there to rearrange and actually start to write programmes and teach, and they've come from that kind of a background, or they've got that expectation, and actually we're asking them to follow an agreed programme, then they might feel frustrated about that. So again, it's about making sure that that expectation is very clear from the get-go. I think it's also really important that we make sure that roles are really meaningful and valued. There is nothing worse than maybe seeing a volunteer maybe on our reception, so for example, if our Fridays are quite quiet and you've got a volunteer that's chomping at the bit and wants to really get stuck in, that feels like they just sat there waiting for the phone to ring and there's nothing for them to do, they can feel really disheartened. So sometimes if they are having a quieter time, we might even come into the other paid staff and ask them if they got any other jobs that the receptionist can help them. Do they need to do a ring round? Can they help you with your marketing, and giving them something meaningful and making sure that everybody feels that they've got something that's actually worth coming here for. I recently had an experience as well of volunteering because I like to volunteer myself, and I am a trained person-centred counsellor, and I gave up 3 hours a week to do some counselling at a local centre, and often found myself sat there twiddling my thumbs because there was such a high rate of no attendance, and after a few months of that, for me, sadly, I was no longer motivated, and I have left that opportunity. So again, it's kind of talking from personal experience there as well. Okay, thinking about leading. We've not got too long. I know we started a little bit late, so I'll make sure that I crack on for you. So staff leading volunteers need to be able to adapt their leadership styles to meet the demands of volunteers. And again, so we're going to have to treat volunteers differently. And again, they might need encouragement. And also, it's really important for staff to recognise that they need to be positive role models, working alongside their volunteers as well, and not kind of, a volunteer is not, we can be friendly with volunteers, they're not necessarily going to become our best friends. Again, you're not going to be sat on the reception talking about each other um, issues. It's about making